in getting started today, I wanted to show you something. I want to share a video with you. It's a very short one, but it's something I think that I've wanted to do for some time. In fact, it's something I've always said I wanted somebody to do. So yeah, if you want somebody to do something, you do it yourself, I guess.
Tonight, the Delta threat. New data from the CDC reveals how infectious and dangerous this COVID variant is. We break down what we now know.
The Biden administration pushes back against the critics of the latest mask guidance based off new data from the CDC.
The CDC recommends you wear a mask when you're in public and indoors. That's true for both the vaccinated and the unvaccinated.
The CDC warning the Delta variant spreads as easily as chickenpox and more easily than the common cold. Now the debate over masks and vaccinations raging in cities, businesses, and the halls of Congress.
Which is it? Vaccines or masks?
We'll ask the director of NIH, Dr. Francis Collins, about the science behind the decision and the push to get more people vaccinated.
Alarming surge.
This is an incredibly contagious version of the virus.
As the Delta variant spreads, the CDC makes a big reversal on masks.
This moment could have been avoided with higher vaccination coverage.
And the president predicts more restrictions. Dr. Anthony Fauci joins us with the latest.
This week on Face the Nation, U.S. health officials say the war against COVID-19 has changed, and the U.S. is back in the top spot when it comes to the highest number of new infections worldwide. Along with the surge in new cases, COVID anxiety is also making a comeback this summer. New CDC data shows vaccinated people who've caught the Delta variant may be just as contagious as non-vaccinated people.
And in the New York Times this morning, who are the unvaccinated in America?
Michael, I'm not quite sure. What do you think the lead story is today?
Well, that's what I was pointing out. You know, if you have to do a lead story, if you're a news network, what determines your lead story? Now, I picked out the COVID listing. There were other stories they put on, but the COVID outbreak was the lead story in every news source this week. And that's the first time it's happened, to my knowledge, in quite some time, since the insurrection, I think, when everybody was leading with that story. But I find it interesting, the way in which the visuals are done. You know, it's obvious, like both of them are obviously biased. So anyway, I've been thinking about that for quite some time, and I thought, well, maybe that's a good way to get started. I'm still working on a longer version of the video where I take the entire introduction, so you can see what the 4 or 5 stories they feature are. But it's becoming more evident to me that, you know, what your source of news is, it's not just the content, it's the media. It's like Marshall McLuhan said, the medium is the message. It's how you're packaging things and presenting them. You know, if you noticed on the Fox News listing, they did cuts that made Joe Biden look a little ridiculous, or maybe a lot ridiculous. And they put some Republican congressman on there saying, is it masks or is it vaccine? I mean, absolutely inane, but, you know, they push that out at you, whereas the other networks are pushing Tony Fauci at you. And I just find it, you know, it's interesting to me to kind of probe into why these news networks are doing what they're doing. And Dustin, I wanted to ask you particularly, you probably haven't seen any of those until I just showed them to you, right?
Right.
You don't see those. If you were doing the same kind of thing on your news sources this week, were they all leading with the COVID?
They all mention stuff. I don't know about leading, but sure. It's still a big topic. Yeah.
You find the same kind of slant in different...
I don't know. Usually it's, you know, if you're not in corporate media, one of the things is like how bias works. And this happened in nonprofits too. Like my story is I'm working at a place trying to end homelessness, but we're also trying to get big bank executives to sponsor our gala, big annual gala to fund the office. Well, I know personally, those big bank executives caused more homelessness than we were able to solve. So maybe that's not the right way to go. But if I say that, I will get fired or something. Right. So I self-regulate. Nobody has to tell me not to pick on the rich people. The same thing in the news. You know, if Jeff Bezos ultimately owns your paper or whatever, you self-censor. It's not what they're saying, it's what they're not saying. So on the independent side, the people who aren't getting paid tend to be a lot more critical, but they also have their own biases. They need more sensationalism to drive traffic to their site. So,
you've been studying and working in media for a long time. Admittedly, the paper you published was not a legacy news source, but it was focused on music. But when you're preparing, let's say, a newspaper for publication, are you thinking about what's most important to you, or what you think your readers will believe to be most important? What drives it?
Well, generally speaking, most of the people who read are reinforcing their biases. They're looking for some story about somebody they like. This is my band. This is who I want to go see. And that's what you're flipping through. And conversely, there's you're flipping through there saying, well, are any of these people somebody I'd like to go see? And I know it's easy to slice out who you don't want. It's like if you don't like Eddie Metal, then you don't like any of the bands that he does, because he's all heavy metal and loud rock and so forth. And yeah, so that's, as far as I'm concerned, that's pretty much it. There's a little leak over from that to the current situation, because of course everybody's thinking about what they're going to do with no work, even when they're already back at it. And so yeah, that in terms of what I was doing for that, I was putting them as much as I could the biggest bands that are coming to town. That's who everybody also wants to see. They don't want to see unless you can personally point to somebody and say, well, this is a really fabulous band, you should go see it. Yeah, maybe they'll go see it. More than likely, they'll be looking to see, who's
trying to score the James Taylor tickets, right?
Yeah, James Taylor, see, Third Street Dive, and so yeah, that's it, and that's so elusive, because of course everybody has their own bias and their own preferences, and that changes from week to week, month to month. Who do you like now? And which makes it ephemeral in lots of ways, just there, So we put some up, and people read a little bit, some that don't. They get back to you about it, and if they like it, and if they don't, they won't.
Steve, in your viewing of the news, are you looking for who's covering the content you want to know about, or do you look for the trusted source? I hope that's a fair question, but in other words, some people like to watch Rachel Maddow in the evening. So whatever Rachel's talking about, that's what they listen to. Even though, I listen to her sometimes, and if she's covering something I don't really care about, I'll flip to another channel or go to sleep, whatever the case may be. But how does it strike you?
Well, I prefer the combination of the two if I can get it. A host of the news show that I think is pretty fair and a good interviewer, and then that they are talking to trusted sources.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you're going to tune to the source, to the channel or network first, anticipating what they're going to do. It's difficult to do otherwise. If I want to hear, want to hear Bernie Sanders' take on something, I have to go to where he's speaking, or I
Sure.
go to his website or something. But
Yeah.
Dustin, does it work the same way for you? I mean, there are
absolutely. There's the idea of hearing things and wanting to know more, and when I'm just in the mode to watch more news, I'll just let it come in, and then if I see a topic, I'll go further. But if my ears are perked up and hear something, then I'll go to a trusted news source. It just depends on how into newsing I'm going to be, of how, and I still do the grazing media diet, just like everybody else here. I'm not flipping through channels, I'm flipping through websites. This is the only difference. That, and when I had flipped through channels, they canceled my RT. They took my public access and put it under a paywall on cable. And so all the all the independent TV went away. So that sucked. But yeah, no, it's the same kind of grazing until I have a topic. Now I'd have to really psychoanalyze myself and record some data of, am I just responding to whatever sensational corporate whisper is in my ear that day, which is probably true. I heard it somewhere, so I'm going to pay attention to what they're going to make me pay attention to, right. I guess.
You're talking about flipping through, blogs or websites or whatever, and I'm flipping channels, and Marcia spends a lot of time flipping through TikTok, which basically flashes up something and you accept it or reject it. So there's this constant, do I want to go further or not? And do you think that the attention span or the amount of time somebody's going to spend looking for the thing they're going to spend time on, you think that's getting shorter, or what's your personal experience on that, Steve? Steve and I were talking the other night about some TV series that we were binge watching, and I think we mentioned the one that you brought up about Ted Lasso, Dustin, which I watched the pilot. I really liked it. I watched the second episode. I really liked it. I went to watch the third episode, and they want their $19.95 a month or whatever it is that they want for Apple. So I don't know whether I'm going to commit, but obviously they have a strategy, which is, just like a drug dealer. You give them a little bit, give them a taste of it until they get hooked. Yeah. And then, charge them the bucks.
Now that's an interesting side story. They're actually calling it the Ted Lasso effect. Now this has done a lot of things, but this is just a new streaming plan. So this is the most successful part of the streaming plan. This is an old story though. Right. They get something really interesting and then they underground market it and they get us all talking about it. And then they force it to an episode a week. You have to keep paying for it. It's a low cost, it's like $5, because people now are like, well, I just replaced my cable bill with my streaming bills.
Right.
And now I'm paying more and I'm less satisfied.
Yeah. Steve, I was asking you before, I know you picked up on what Dustin was saying about the Ted Lasso series. Is that typical that you would hear somebody say, I saw something good, and then you'd go investigate it? Is that?
Yeah. Yes, that's not unusual. That I would follow the same thing on, an article or a book or a movie, or even a news show. But I was going back to your question about, how much time you spend on a topic. I was just trying to think. My experience is a fair amount of grazing. Like Dustin says, I think we all do that because how else do you find out, the spread of what might be reported? But then I still tend to read long articles, either New York Times or New Yorker, New York Magazine. I got to kind of have this New York orientation, I think, because my daughter lives there. But anyway, some sources where you can get a little more in-depth discussion of a topic.
I'd like to add to that real quick. I do the grazing, but the only thing that's going to spend me more time in my experience that I can remember right now is if I'm planning to argue. So this stuff comes up, and if something really like this was the Syria and the OCPW report and Assad stuff, and this all went around Tulsi Gabbard, and I was a big fan, and everybody's giving her shit, and so I go and really read into it, and the worst part about these stories is the way the media landscape is that just kind of hits you with it, and you don't get the real truth until months later. And by that time, you're the wacko who still cares. Everybody else has moved on.
Right.
And I still cared because I'm like, no, I was right all along. You guys were the jerks and you didn't know it and you wouldn't listen to me. I've taken it personally. So that's why I spend more time on it. And a lot of the sensational stuff, you don't take it personally. You're just reactive.
Yeah. Oh, you introduced me years ago to, I guess it's a site or a service called Stumble Upon. I don't use that anymore. I get, I think Microsoft does it for me now, but it was basically a spin the wheel and see what comes up on the internet, whatever it would be. I found that interesting because I would get exposed to things that ordinarily I wouldn't seek out.
Yep.
And I'm wondering, is that something that you've continued with? Do you still use that, or is it?
They're out of business, which is unhappy.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah, I guess.
Flip, give me this, what do you got? What's interesting? Oh, look here. And now, as you say, it's all surrounded by commercials and the content that they're giving you to give you some of that, but it's, the selection is limited and the variability is limited. So, what I have substituted that with is overseas Twitter stories. What's going on in Czechoslovakia, what's going on in Bulgaria, what's happening over in the rest of the world away from what we're doing, because, that's kind of going to be where a whole lot of stuff starts happening again. And it's a good idea to keep up with what's happening over there. So, that's kind of what I still miss Stumble Upon. And, I guess they couldn't figure out how to make a buck. So there we go.
Yeah. Well, back to the original question of, these news sources that I showed you in the beginning selected some different stories. Now, I don't have that prepared to show you. I ran out of time. It takes a little while to do this, but the things that they were talking about otherwise behind the COVID leadoff story, there was some sources tend to focus on political stuff, others on social commentary, others on science, if something new is happening. If you were preparing the news, okay, where do you look for the lead story? In other words, sometimes it falls on you, there's a disaster like the pandemic, but other times there's a lot of things going on. And Dustin, you said last week, if you could talk to the world, well, you can't give them a speech, but you can give them a headline, right? What headline would you give them? And for me, just to clarify my question, for me, it's always about the environment, always what's going on in the environment, because nothing else really matters when the environment is compromised. So what is it that you generally would look for? Anybody on this is a story that you would seek out some information about.
I'll start. Mine is really independent infrastructure. So anything that empowers yourself. My whole thing is. People are starting to get it is, no, you just got to build it yourself, just like every other time in history. And how do you empower yourself? How do you empower your community? How do you move away from corporatocracy? And all of that enables groups to do things like address the environment.
So you're looking out for that kind of story, and you're more likely to find such stories in certain sources. You go
Sure, yeah. The corporate media is not going to really tell me how to start my own bank.
Right. At least not to their, not willingly.
Right.
Steve, how about you? Is there a particular topic that, last week we were asking about what caught your attention, but this is kind of conversely, what things are you looking for?
Well, I think there's a general lack of knowledge amongst a broad swath of our U.S. population, probably world population as well. So I'd be looking for things that would inform people. If I was the one making the headlines, I'd be trying to inform them about the truth as we know it, to borrow a phrase. The environment would be one. The international relations of governments and countries would be another. It's all the things that we have to do to deal with the big problems of the environment or the pandemic or policy or whatever the issue is.
Paul, you have a particular topic that you seek out or something that grabs you?
Well, these days I'm, paying attention to, who's refusing to admit that there's such a thing as COVID. I can't wrap my head. How is it that people find that to be a criminal act to go out and either not get vaccinated or to get vaccinated? It's nuts, because I know all you guys and me too. We're all old enough that we got vaccinated a bunch when we were kids. I got vaccinated, and they didn't ask me whether I was wanted it or not. They'd say stand up over there, and they'd come by and give you a shot for polio or vaccine for whatever happened. They be the current one they got, and I'm still that way. If they got a new vaccine that I need that might infect me, I go get it. And I'm pretty aggressive about it. So that's in that sense it guides. The news still works to some degree, but you always have to adjust what you see in it and what you want to get out of it in order to all work. So yeah, it's an odd situation. Now they're already talking about coming along with the new COVID vaccine. Pfizer wants you to take another shot at it, which is you think, well, that's kind of odd. They're selling you more. No, except they're not really. The government's paying for it, but they're not getting big money for it. So I don't know. That's an interesting thing. The idea that a pharmaceutical company actually is trying to help you out. Oh.
Yeah. That was such an interesting. I still feel that on a personal level, I was always pro-vaccine. I was always going to get it. I'm not anti-vax. But if I did any sort of pushback at all, like I still get it. I'm like, no, I'm on your side. But if moment of question, and now I'm a Nazi, all right? I still get that. Because I'm like, okay, no, I believe in vaccines. I also understand how corporations work. Yeah. So I have valid questions, I think. And you've just grouped me in with neo-Nazis. And I'm like, you've met me. I'm the opposite of that. Come on. Why are you being so reactive? And I'm talking to people in my head right now. And it was like, and when this rolled out, I'm like, okay, well, we understand corporations. I remember the HPV vaccine, right? This was the last kind of vaccine controversy I remember. And I'm like, okay, you guys aren't going into specifics. Like, okay, I see this as good, but I also see there's a lot of other things. Like it felt, I'm not a scientist. It felt like something was being forced on the population for profit motive than anything else, even though it had good things. But I was not allowed to question that. By comment by my friends, not to mention news media and politicians, I was not allowed to question it. And I'm like, okay, guys, do you see how you're acting? You're acting like all the people you hate. You're acting like those fundamental Christians. Do you see this? And then I get more hate because you can't say that.
Right. That's that intolerant. Intolerant of intolerance, right? I have witnessed this in the media. I guess I watched too much of it, but it used to be on these shows I was listing before on Meet the Press and Face the Nation and so forth, that they would bring on different people, and the commentator's role, the newscaster's role, was to put them on the spot. It didn't matter whether it was left or right. They would try to put them on the spot. That their role as a journalist was to challenge what someone said. To your point, Dustin, yeah, okay, you say you're doing this for the right reason, but here are some things that I want to know about also. That seems to be changing. That seems to be, when Rachel Maddow has Tony Fauci on the show, she's licking his boots. I mean, he just can't do any wrong as far as she's concerned. Well, that's not her role. Her role as a journalist is to challenge what he says. Even if she thinks he's right, you still, it's like due diligence. Your role is to challenge what the man says. And if you see inconsistencies, point those out, look for justification, be tough on them.
Yeah.
And I think what we've done, we saw this at its apex when Trump just refused to talk to people. No, you're from a fake news outlet. I won't talk to you. I won't even have you in my news conference because I won't be challenged. And so on both sides, there's this team orientation. Well, we're going to have people on Meet the Press who agree with what we say. That way we'll have a nice, pleasant news show. We're not going to have, Jim Jordan come on and go to town on him. So,
and the politics is wrestling, guys. So go watch some wrestling and watch how the wrestling commentators deal with the different factions. And it's all about attention as currency. It's not about truth or anything. It's about how much screen time and applause I can get to keep my job or make more money. That's it. We've made the transition.
Yeah. Let me try to link the things that you two guys are talking about. Dustin, you were saying that a doubt, even if something is being put forward for the common good. Okay, you want to be sure you understand that it's a common good and not corporate profit that's behind it. Michael's saying, well, people should be in the news media, the hosts, they should be challenging their guests to be sure we get at the truth. I think there's also a checks and balances governmental role, like of the FDA with the pharmaceutical companies, to be sure that we're talking about science and facts and, not just corporate greed. And with the COVID, we got a little bit of insight into what FDA does. And the thing that scared me so much in the Trump administration was how he was cutting the fairness and efficacy of a lot of these government agencies to do their job, which is to check and balance. They don't do a perfect job, but there's a role for them to be questioning, is this a drug that we should approve to be put on the market to help in a medical health way, not just to help the corporations make more money. So I think there's a mix here. It's not just media. It's not just individuals. We also need these systems to work. And when people attack the systems, we're going, there's a deep state here. We got to get rid of these people, blah, blah, blah. And actually, I think media is one thing that I've thought for years. Look at all the stories in movies and TV shows about bad government, bad cops, bad government, conspiracies within the government. It makes for a dramatic story, but it also undermines people's confidence, whether there are people out there doing a good job or not. Most people don't know. How much do you know about FDA approval process until we started looking at it with COVID? Not much.